Hi, guys. Welcome to Syncromystic Episode 5. I'm Wayne McRoy, and this is my good friend Richard Willett, and we're going to break down some of the things going on in the world today, and we're going to take a look at some uncomfortable subjects today, because many people don't like to touch upon this, but we will dare to tread on that ground, won't we, Richard?
We will, because this is very pertinent now, and I've been banging on about this Chabad guys for quite some time, and they're more out there than what this group that we're going to talk about today. But they have the setup to me seems very, very similar. Although this seems far even more extreme than the Chabad guys. They seem to be more into the mystics and the occult, whereas these guys just seem to be extreme in what they are doing and horrific and outright cult. They'll both be cults to me, but they pretend not to like each other, in my opinion. They pretend to be against each other, but there's some really weird flags here as to what's going on. So we don't know who fund these guys. So it was you, Wayne, that put me onto these guys, and fascinating. So this is this Lev Tahor cult, which is a Jewish sect, extreme Jewish Orthodox sect. Just tell us a little bit more about them. I know they originated in Israel, had a bit of time in Brooklyn, don't they all? And then Canada, and now they're in Guatemala, and they keep running away, but they've been caught up with now. This is horrific, but it's systematic to how these intelligence agencies appear to use these religions.
Oh, certainly. And that's all part and parcel of this. Now, this Lev Tahor group was actually founded in 1988. So it's not really all that old of an organization. And essentially, they share a lot of the same religious philosophies and ideologies and traditions as the Chabad groups do. And it's a more extremist version of the Chabad groups. And they try to play this off as this Lev Tahor group is actually an anti-Zionist group. So they use this as a type of a scapegoat. And this group of people has been jumping from nation to nation in various ways. They started, I guess, here in the U.S., in Brooklyn for a time. And then they went to Canada. They were in Israel. They started in Israel, and they started in the U.S. Most of them are U.S. or Canadian citizens, though, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. And now they've gone down into, where is it, Argentina? Guatemala,
yeah.
Guatemala, yeah, in South America. They had a presence in Mexico for some time, too. And they are largely associated with human trafficking and child trafficking. And this is all well documented. I mean, they've actually had prosecutions against many of the leaders of these groups, and they've actually indicted them on this. And now Guatemala, just within the past month or so, has had a run-in with this group, and they took into custody like 140 or 160 children or something, and are trying to figure out what the parentage of the children are. And this group has actually been out in the streets battling the police there in Guatemala over this. And these are some extreme factions that cling to some of these older type of Judaic traditions and customs, and they take it to an extreme. And that's done on purpose. They have to present this as the extreme. You know how the media uses all of this in that way. So they present this extreme, and of course it's in opposition to the nation state of Israel, because they have to present that side of it. So they say they're anti-Zionist. They're against what's going on the other side there. And one side considers the other extremists. Here's the whole deal. We have this Lev Tahor group. They claim to be anti-Zionist, but of course, the mainstream Chabad cult is pro-Zionist, ostensibly. So you have this division among these same various factions of the religious structure that they have there. And they always use religion as a facade for the shell of other things. And oftentimes, when it relates to organized crime, let's be honest about it, they will use different factions of these groups to create this dynamic, this Hegelian dialectic between them as a control mechanism and as a way of deflecting attention away from the main perpetrators at the top of the power structure with all of it. And here, look, it's this one small group. You see, it's this Lev Tahor group that's performing all of these actions with trafficking children and all of this stuff going on. Don't look at the mainstream Zionist Israeli government or the intelligence agencies that run those governments from the inside. Things like Mossad, CIA, MI6, all of these organizations are interconnected at the topmost levels in the world. And of course, they get their operating principles from the old secret society groups, as we always discuss here. And this is something that I've found. They get all of their methodologies from the old secret society groups, and a lot of it actually has its origination back with the assassins back in the 1100s. And it's interesting to see how all of this has been ported over to today. And you could see reflections of this, not just in this Lev Tahor group, but people don't often associate that. But you could also see this with Islamic extremism, with groups like ISIS and things like this as well. They use the same playbook that the assassins used. And people that don't know their history, they wouldn't understand this. They wouldn't realize, hey, these people are doing the same things that were done way back then, almost 1,000 years ago, and having similar results going on. The assassins struck fear throughout the local area there for a long, long time in many of these prominent people's palaces, these kings and rulers and stuff like that. They struck fear in the hearts of these people because they were able to infiltrate into their court and give these people warnings. There's one story where one of these rulers was against the assassin faction, and he woke up one morning with a dagger next to his head with a note on it saying that he better wise up. Something, I'm paraphrasing, of course, that he better wise up or he was going to be taken out. And he had no idea that he was infiltrated in that way and didn't know who did this. And this kind of thing struck fear and terror in the hearts of these people. So they would dare not to oppose the organization at the topmost levels. So they would institute policies that helped this organization. The same thing goes on today, and they call it the intelligence community. And I'm being as blatantly honest here as I can. The intelligence community is littered with these secret society group prospects all throughout it. They're interconnected, they're interlaced, and there's this power structure that exists, and there's factions of this power structure at the topmost levels that fights over who gets to call the shots. And there's just been a big upheaval in this power structure where one side has taken over from the other. And we see that reflected not only in American politics, but in things going on all over the world. The ideologies are shifting back again. You see, they do this. They'll take it to the extreme left, and then they'll take it to the extreme right in order to shift the public consciousness towards the middle. And these different factions have different ideologies as to how to get to their ultimate goal. But they both have the same goal in mind, the same ultimate goal. But sometimes it's just a matter of who's calling the shots at the top. And there's always this infighting at the topmost levels within this secret organization, within these secret organizations, this power structure. And we've just seen an upheaval, like I was talking about. So one side has shifted to the other. Now you could look at these factions from a simplistic viewpoint. Let's put it out there as a simplistic viewpoint. Now, previously, with the Biden administration and everything going on with that, you were looking primarily at a Jesuit-controlled structure in the world. And now it seems to be shifting more towards Freemasonic ideas. And these groups interlaced at the topmost levels are the same group. But there's people that differ on their opinions of how to get things done. And
That's
now
just
it
really
seems like
interesting, Wayne. Just like to just back up what you said there, because Dr. Fauci is a Jesuit educated. We know this. Obviously, he was controlling Trump. But a lot of people know that Donald Trump attended a Jesuit university too. He didn't graduate. They never did. They don't need to. That's not what they're there for. So you've got a couple of Jesuits there, but also you've got the Freemasonic connection in there and the Chabad connection in there as well with Israel, and also Bill Gates' missus. She was also a well-known Jesuit as well. So what you're saying makes absolute sense. And then you're looking at the Knights Templar, who learned a lot of what they learned from the assassins anyway. So, I with both me and you've always said, they all connect. They might fight amongst each other, but when they say the power switching, we can see something happening. It's just not obvious because people don't know, and I'm not saying I know all of it. That where the power is shifting from back and forth. Is it between the Jesuits and is it between the Freemasons, or are we having a complete overhaul there? Something is shifting about, obviously, but they're all against the common man having his own way in the world.
Absolutely. And this all has to do with this mentality of this division in society, this class division that's gone on. You've always, behind the scenes, had this controlling class, this elitist class, and you had the underclass, and we're all considered the underclass. And one of the big experiments that has gone on happened here in America, where they wanted to create a middle class. And a lot of this has to do with the divisions between the ruling class and the lower class, and taking the ideologies of the old black nobility families and eliminating those, in one sense, by empowering some more of the commoners to interbreed with the royal bloodlines and stock to bring about this middle class. And we have this middle class in order to industrialize the world and get things in place how they wanted them. But now what their plan is they want to collapse this middle class and make it once again just this ruling class versus the ruled class. And that's what they've been engineering for, probably the past 2 centuries now. So the grand experiment that was America was intended to empower the common man in order to bring about changes in the world and bring about innovations in the world that these people needed in order to achieve their ultimate goal, and using the minds of the masses to bring this about, using the common man to bring this about. So once they got what they wanted, now they want to shift away from empowering this middle class and separate it down to a ruling class and a ruled class. And thus they've begun their great culling. And they've begun all the economic policies that have decimated the middle class here in America, and I'm sure in other nations around the world too. So we see this going on, and this is about infighting at the topmost levels of this power structure. So to put it in a simplistic state of mind, I use the analogy of the Jesuit versus the Freemasonic ideas battling back and forth, because although ostensibly they're the same organization at the topmost levels, they do have differing ideologies on how to get things done, and they have differing views on how to use religion as a modus operandi to get things done. So you had this Jesuit class, which is more commonly associated with Catholicism, and you have the Freemasonic class, which is more geared towards the other side of Christianity, which would be the breaking away of Protestantism from the Catholic Church. So you have the Protestant side and the Catholic side of these organizations. And that's just how they manipulate Western Christian culture in that way. So they use these as manipulation tools. And of course, you cannot separate Christianity from Judaism, not entirely anyway, because one was born out of the other. So therefore, they also use the Judaic to control and steer the minds of those that still follow that religion. And they do the same thing with Islam too. All these big 3 major monotheistic religions, they use these different dichotomies to control them. So we have these opposing factions in each of these. Now there's many different factions in the Islamic side of this. You have Sufism, and of course you have all of these other Islamic ideas. And of course, they always emphasize the Islamic extremism. And I think we're going to see a resurgence of that as a control mechanism here in the very near future. They're going to use this as an excuse to do some things. And Trump is talking about America taking over Gaza Strip, and Christians everywhere should be majorly concerned about that. Yeah. But largely, many of them just completely ignore that in America here, because a lot of them are happy about some of the domestic policies that are being implemented right now and how they're exposing corruption and this kind of thing that's been going on, and misappropriated funds for taxes and stuff like that. So they largely support that, and they'll ignore all the other red flags that are going on in the background with the Trump administration. They do this all the time. They counterbalance their bad works with their good works. It's all the karmic principle. And even though at the topmost levels, some of these factions within the secret society groups and the intelligence agencies that really run things, they disagree on policy, on how to get there. And they will sometimes trade power back and forth to push the football further down the field in the proverbial sense. So we see that going on, and they've used this division between this Chabad cult and this Lev Tahor cult to scapegoat the Lev Tahor cult. You see, they're anti-Zionists, and they don't espouse the same values that we do. That's what the claim would be. And look what they're doing. They're the ones that are responsible for the trafficking of children and everything else. It's to deflect blame. This goes on all over the world under all kinds of different facades. And it's not just this one group that's doing it. They're directed and controlled from above. So when we understand that, then we know that this is a look what this hand's doing, not what that hand's doing type of a scenario. So that's the
really
important.
interesting there, Wayne. What you said there is this young lad. He's come out of nowhere, but he's come out of that cult. And I'm not saying that he was clearly in that cult and clearly abused in that cult, and we'll go into the abuse that they do. But this young lad, Mendy Levy, which really struck me. Well, one of the first connection was that these guys, Lev Tahor, they were in Brooklyn for a while, so that speaks volumes. They were sharing that area with the Chabad guys. Now, Mendy Levy says that he's the one who's saying that they are completely against anything Chabad and burn all their books. But then when he leaves there, he gets fostered. And now he's not a kid anymore. He's 19, 20, 21. Well, I don't know why he's getting fostered by a Chabad family. And then he has time in New York, and then time over in Israel, and time back in Canada. Now, I'm not saying he's working for anyone, but that seems a bit bizarre to me, to go from one cult to what I would say is another cult of a just slightly different variety. So what you're saying there completely makes sense, that maybe that this young lad is actually telling the truth what's going in there, but the scapegoating part of using them as opposed to looking at the Chabad guys that are more openly, clearly connected to all of these top level politicians, including Trump, Netanyahu. These are the guys pushing what we've spoken about for ages, this messianic agenda that connects in with the Assassins, the Knights Templar, and the Jesuits, all believe in this Solomon's Temple nonsense. What I wanted to point out here is how they get funded. So in 2012, so they were registered at this Lev Tahor. Sorry, I have to keep looking at it because the kid's called Mendy Levy, which may be a nod and a wink.
Sounds like it's the old game of the phonetic Kabbalah at play there. That's how you could know you're onto something with perhaps this kid being an operative of some sort, or at the very least, a useful tool for those controllers. They always do this with the name game.
I thought so. It's just because suddenly he comes out there, he's speaking about it, and then he's got 6 million views on his podcast of people that have been doing this for a long time. Yes, it's an interesting subject, but that seems to me that there's some money behind this somewhere in pushing that narrative. Now, the narrative does not have to not be true. That's a terrible way of constructing a sentence, but you know what I mean. It's better that it is true, but it doesn't mean it's been used in that way. So this Lev Tahors, they refused to pay some of their taxes, so they were tax exempt, and they amassed over 6 million. Over 6 million. These guys don't do anything. They don't produce anything. Apparently, they've got a book, like a publishing company, but I mean, it doesn't seem to that money's coming from that. So the radical Jewish group Lev Tahor has operated for more than a decade as a religious charity with millions of dollars flowing through its accounts. 6 million. And at one point they gave, so basically washed it, basically I would say, 3.3 million to a group called, now I've lost it, where are they? 3.3 million to a group called Brendan Metcalf. He's the he's the guy that's running Friends of the Holy Land. 3.3 million, these Lev Tahor guys. So if this is laundered money or money made through child trafficking, it's going from one Jewish charity to the next. And that charity is the Friends of the Holy Land. And so these Lev Tahor guys give them 3.3 million. Basically, from what I can tell, is, keep that for us. Yeah, in 2012, the Society for Spiritual Development, which is one of the charitable arms of this Lev Tahor, transferred 3.3 million to another Jewish charity in Quebec, Canada, obviously, the Canadian Friends of Holy Land Institution. So all of these charities are passing around what would say, and I think I would say, and I think many people would say, money made from trafficking children, trafficking drugs, trafficking information. These is a criminal syndicate pretending to be a faith. And when you look into try and think about what the Lev Tahor guys believe, it's not like the Sabbat guys where you can kind of trace it back to their Kabbalah roots, the Lurianic Kabbalah, and what they want their outcomes to. And they put it all on their website pretty much without all the blatantly saying we want to kill you all and build a temple. But they will tell you what their outcomes are in the nicest way possible. These guys don't seem to have an outcome. They don't seem to have an ideology at all. It's very bizarre, other than we want to take it back to the roots of Judaism and do it basically fundamentally. I'm not sure how getting 34 to 60-year-old men marrying 12-year-old kids is part of Judaism, but there you go. That's what they're doing. So this, to me, what you're saying is these are cutouts for intelligence and trafficking, and it's all intermixed. So when you have these guys, these Chabad guys round Donald Trump, RFK Jr., clearly Shmuley was controlling him. All the others, Putin, Zelensky. When you're looking at all these guys, you're looking at a criminal enterprise around these politicians, clearly. And I find it mind-blowing that people just disregard this stuff. Even if you were to believe that Chabad believe this stuff and they want their temple and they wanted their world to come and all of that stuff, that's bad enough. I mean, that's mad enough. And it could be that they're pretending to believe these things, and that's not really what they want. They're just criminals and want to make, control money through criminal enterprises and using that as a way of getting young, impressionable people in who think they're serving their God. Who knows what their real intention is? But it's clear that these are criminal enterprises. Is it because it's a Jewish thing and people just don't want to call it out because of the Holocaust, which many of these, unfortunately, Ashkenazi Jews created in the first place to have a problem reaction solution to create their new land of Israel? Unfortunately, that's true. And I don't understand why people are just ignoring it, Wayne, when it's so blatantly obvious. This Lev Tahor guys, and you believe that they're taking the scapegoat route for taking the heat off groups like Chabad.
Well, here's what I could explain about all of this. And regardless of what religion it is or what faith that you belong to, it's all been weaponized in a way by these secret society groups. And this is key because this is important to understand. You could know a tree by its fruits. The Bible tells us that. So look at the fruits of what's being done and associated with these various scapegoating groups that they've put together for these various religious factions. You know what's at play there. You know what the fruits are. It's all bad things. Essentially, what's been done is using and manipulating and leveraging, there's the word lev again, leveraging all of these religious ideologies and faiths against people's belief systems to get things done. This all ascribes back centrally to what is known as the Luciferian doctrine and the Luciferian philosophy. And all of these groups at the topmost levels, these secret societies that control these various religious factions and these public faces of religious factions, especially these ones that are being presented to you as the bad side of things, they're leveraging these principles against the minds of the men of this world and the women. I mean, the minds of men generally being human beings. If you want to go back to some of the biblical context here, they're leveraging these principles against the masses in order to get people to step back away from spiritual ideas and faith. They want people to get very much jaded to all of this and become just so offended by all of it that they want to step away from all types of spirituality and faith. And what this has to do with is introducing this Luciferian doctrine at last. And Albert Pike talked about this in his letters to Mazzini that were actually on display in one of the British museums at one point, but have now since disappeared. He communicated this idea about World War III, and maybe some of the people have seen this before. He said something to the effect of, we will unleash the nihilists until all these different religions finally are crushed, and the only thing that remains at the end will be the pure Luciferian doctrine. And that's what it's all about, and that's what all of these different groups at the topmost levels are trying to bring about in this world. The unveiling of the Luciferic principle, and this has everything to do with the rise of Antichrist and all of that, as explained in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, and in all of the eschatological types of sources that we see. And all of these things are chess pieces being moved across the board, the game board, the tessellated game board that is the world stage. And we're seeing all of this coming into play here. But that's the ultimate goal, and that's ultimately what's behind all of these different maneuvers, strategic maneuvers by this power structure. It's this Luciferic spirit, and some would call it the spirit of Baphomet. It's the Baphometic spirit that is the outer head of all of these orders, all of these secret society groups. It's the spiritual component involved. It is what steers and guides and directs things. And it does so in this way, and it utilizes all of these networks that have been established as the intelligence community in this world. And through the intelligence community, it is interpenetrated in all different places through governments and corporations, and especially in the guise of philanthropic organizations, which largely are the ones that launder all of the funding and the means to get this stuff done. And I find it interesting that you were mentioning that this Lev Tahor group was funded, or had actually donated 3.3 million to some other organization. There's the 33. There's your Masonic tie-in. There are always these numbers encoding all of these things. There's a reason they gave them 3.3 million and not 3.4 million or 3.2 million, or just a plain even 3 million or 3.5 million. There's a reason for that. It's all the occult principle behind it. It's all the leveraging of the spirit behind it. And a lot of it falls back to this whole Luciferic doctrine. And that may be an uncomfortable truth for people to come to grips with, but certainly it's there and it's present. And if you research this stuff as deeply as I have, you'll find it.
Do you think, Wayne, this so the guy, so let's go back a little bit to how this started. So there's a guy called Shlomo Hellbrands, his son runs it now, was an Israeli-born cult leader. I don't think he was born a cult leader, but that's why I've written it. He was the founder and Rebbe of Lev Tahor. Originally established his community in Israel, which he claimed to have modeled after the Satmar Hasidic movement. See, this is what other people don't understand. There's so many different subsects of Judaism and all faiths that it gets so convoluted and confusing. Hellbrands moved his community to the United States, where he was convicted in 1994 for kidnapping, for which he served 2 years in prison. So he's always been convicted for kidnapping. Then I think he tried to explain it away that he was taking the kids away from the parents for their own good. During this time, he was accused by former community members of child abuse, serving medicine and psychological pills, and using various punishments on his followers. They basically beat these children and sexually abused them. He was deported back to Israel. So he was deported back to Israel, but in 2001, he fled to Canada. I mean, obviously, someone's helping these people. I had the same thing when I was looking into the Jesuits. Adam Weishaupt, he got shot in the leg during a war, Pampelune, I believe it was. And then the opposite side helped him back to the castle. So what do you do? Why would you do that? None of it makes any sense, because they're all bloody helped. So he's gone back to Israel. So where do you think this thing is coming out of? He's basically got rehabilitated and set up again with a load of money to go and do it again. Went to Quebec, and then they chased him out there, and now he's in now they're in Guatemala. And Israel clearly behind this, even though they say that. So he's anti-Zionism, but he's cleared off to Israel in 2001. He fled, but they were looking after him after he was convicted of kidnapping children. So how can you go and tell me that he's anti-Zionist when he's fled to Israel, Zionist-controlled Israel, taken care of, then let go again, out to Canada to go and do it again, whilst he's a convicted child smuggler and kidnapper? Like, it doesn't make any sense. When you start to look at these things, you pick these things apart, like, that is nonsense. Clearly, he's being propped up. So this is a psychological game, like not game, but it's a psychological, what would you call it? An intelligence operation here that they're doing. What? And then now his son, who would have been born into this, so you can kind of, you've got to acknowledge that these kids are born into this. He's now been arrested. That was late February that you sent me that. So his son now is in going to basically jail for a long time because of this. He would have been born into it. Is it all about that 3.3 million, which may be just, as you said, I completely agree with you. That's a 33-degree Mason symbology. Doesn't mean they sent 3.3 million. It just means that that's the numbers they're using as signifying in the articles. Gaz put out a video this morning talking about some of these bombs that have been given to Israel, and they were 11 tons. Well, 11 is the most evil number for Aleister Crowley. So once you start to see these things, they're put in the articles as a nod and a wink. I'm not saying the article writer knows those because they're just giving the information, but you start to track it through. It is utterly fascinating. And there's a lot of kids still stuck in this, and this is openly a cult, really. Whereas Chabad doesn't get categorized as a cult. I would say it absolutely is. It's less harsh in many ways, but it's still a cult. What would be the overall purpose, do you think, Wayne, of this? Is it about making money for operations that are black budget operations, trafficking and compromat whilst trafficking these kids? What is it all about? Because some people just think, I don't see the purpose of it. Like, I can understand with Chabad because they have this ideological world to come, Luciferian world to come, as you say, where they want this kind of outcome. But is that the only reason? Or is everything else to facilitate that outcome? And everything else is kind of money to make that happen, to bribe politicians, to keep politicians on blackmailed, to run these operations? Is all that money, and the military as well? You've got the atomic weapons part of it as well, which is clearly been manipulated. You've got artificial intelligence now. I looked into the video I did last week. You meant to have this US-China artificial intelligence race, and you find out there's 46,000 papers that's shared between them, contributing from universities in China, with this DeepSeek was part of it, and the universities MIT in America. They're collaborating, clearly. Even the US Congress is worried about it. So what is it all about, Wayne? Is it really all about this ideology of this Luciferian ideology? I don't, it seems such a massive thing to try and bring that about. I find myself almost trying to look for something else that's more, are these just greedy people? It's you know what I mean? It's hard to believe that people go to this length for this amount of time to do this stuff.
Well, it's a very multifaceted and multi-layered problem that we face, because always, always, always at the heart and core of all of it lies this occultic belief system. And that is the overarching thing that really directs and guides this. And there's a spiritual component to this that guides and directs this, a beyond human intelligence that guides and directs this. So what exactly that intelligence's motivation is, we could speculate, but I can't say for certain what exactly that might be. I do have my suspicions, and I'm currently writing a book about this, but certainly we see the layers of the onion here peeling away. Now, money is a big consideration with this. There's many people who just want to have as much as they can in this earthly life, and will go about going along to get along with these programs to further place themselves in a position of power or influence or a position of wealth. And a lot of it has to do with backroom deals by these power brokers of this world, this elitist class, the Olympians, they like to call themselves. They make backroom deals. Everything's a deal. And Fortune de Saint Germain described it like this. He says they make deals. That's how they do things. And that's what Donald Trump has been trying to normalize in the public purview here. And that's why he's probably kind of dangerous to the power structure, because he's revealing their methodologies. It's a type of revelation of the method. It's all about deals between these ultra wealthy elitist class people. They'll make a deal. Okay, we'll let you run the show for a while. We'll let your faction run the show for a while and see how things go. But in return, you give us this. That's how they operate. It's a deal. It's one hand doing something for the other hand that benefits them. So they make these deals, and then they'll stand back and let certain things happen to a certain degree. And then when things begin to spiral out of control, they'll pull the reins back a little bit, and maybe they'll switch at the top who's running the show, who's calling the shots. And they achieve their agendas in this way. So it's all based on backroom deals at one level that many of these people that are more carnally minded, that are in the system, will appropriate these certain things in order to benefit themselves in some way, shape, or form. So like I said, there's layers to this. And I've tried to break this down into a more simplified version of this for people. At the highest and topmost levels of the power structure of this world, there are what I call the dark occultists who run things. And just beneath them are their minions, the technocrats, who do things, and oftentimes they don't know what the real plan is, what the real outcome is. They're just there to make the deals and put things together to benefit themselves, and they get rewarded for their efforts in certain ways. And this is a diversion tactic of sorts to take people's eyes off of where it really goes down. And that's at the level of these dark occultists who run things and the spiritual powers that guide them.
Wayne, would you give me an example of a technocrat right now? Are you talking about Henry Kissinger type people? Who are we talking about? Just an example of one or two.
Right. Well, Henry Kissinger is a great example of this. Elon Musk, I would say, is another. We have these power brokers in this world. This would be your committee of 300 people, the Olympians, they call themselves. These are the technocrats. These are not really the people who call the shots at the end of the day, but they give you this illusion that they do, and that is to misdirect the public as to what's going on, to misdirect the public to the knowledge, from the knowledge, I should say, that it's a spiritual battle, that there's something more spiritual happening at the highest, most echelons. And that's where we're at. So you have some of these people behind the scenes who barely get mentioned, who are many of these occultists who run things, and their whole reason for doing the things they do is to accumulate power, occult power and magical power for themselves, as well as wealth and influence and control. And they want to be the gods of this place. And then they have their minions, their underlings, that I would call the technocrats, which consist of this committee of 300 and these other people that are out there making policies in this world and instantiating different agendas in this world. They're the ones that get it done. It's not just a Granger commercial, the ones that get it done. It's this mindset of the secret society pyramid scheme that they've set up, and that's exactly what it is. At the topmost level, you have centralized control by a very select few, and underneath them, they have their useful idiots, the technocrats, running around doing the dirty work for them, and they don't get their hands dirty in all of this. They let the spiritual component guide and direct this, and they sit back and they reap the benefits thereof, and they make their secret deals, and they further escalate their occult power behind the scenes, and they try to establish themselves as the gods in this place, and that is their ultimate goal. And all of this relates directly to a little philosophy known as transhumanism, which is going to be openly the physical manifestation of the Luciferian doctrine in this world. That's what they're pushing for. And I hope that's a good explanation.
So where would a group like Lev Tahor fit in with that hierarchy? What would be their purpose? I mean, some of them might just be horrible perverts and completely demented. I'm sure that's taken advantage of too. But is it a case of that's a way of making money to bring about these things? If you've got 3.3 million, you're just putting across from one charity to the next. Obviously, none of the charities are taxable. So you've got the IRS running around and the tax office here in the UK running around trying to basically, it's almost like a police service. And obviously, there's corruption within that as well. But what would be the purpose of that group? Her bad guys, as I said earlier, I can understand because of the ideology. And but with this group, what would be their purpose? Is it literally trafficking and making money? Is that what their purpose would be? I mean, other than, you know, the sordid sexual deviance of some of the people that are leading it, what would be the purpose of this in that hierarchy you just explained?
Well, here's the uncomfortable truth with all of that. This has more to do with those dark occultists behind the scenes. This is a way in which they allegedly enhance their magical or occult power, is through these types of satanic ritual abuse that has been documented. And this Lev Tahor group is just an example of the scapegoating of a Jewish sect involved with that. Now, there's a lot of reason why these people in charge, these dark occultists, like to deflect blame for things on these types of groups. Well, obviously, they don't want you looking over here. They want you to look over there. That's the group that's responsible. They're just a bunch of extremists. And it has nothing to do with any of this conspiracy theory stuff that's out there. That doesn't really happen, they want you to believe. But satanic ritual abuse is a real thing. It's also called Masonic ritual abuse in some regards as well. This goes on. This stuff is documented, and it goes on across all different religious groups and philosophies and all different cultures around the world. They sometimes call it different things, but the precepts of it are exactly the same. And you can find a lot of this actually written about as to why it is they do this stuff, and it's all about the accumulation of magical power. You could find this written in some works by Aleister Crowley. You could find it in works of the OTO, of the Argentium Astrum, of these other specialist type magical occult fraternities. They talk about this stuff openly in their literature, but that literature was only primarily reserved for members within those organizations. But now, because of this wonderful tool that we have, that's the internet, that was built with the intention to enslave us, but came with the side effect of we have information at our fingertips that wasn't readily available before, we can find some of these things now, and you can find a lot of this. So this is the reason why they traffic children and human beings, because it's all about this garnering of more occult power by those that want to be the gods of this place. So there is a level of it that's about maybe generating money, and it's about greed and that kind of thing at some level. But at another level, it's about this accumulation of magical power or occult power and this ascension to what they call crossing the abyss for the magician, where they become beyond reproach in this world, in their viewpoint. This is what they teach in many of these high-level secret society groups, especially the more occult and Baphometic forms of them, that at some point you are no longer bound by the laws of nature or moral laws once you ascend to that level where you cross the abyss. That's what they call it. Then your will is all that matters. And Aleister Crowley said it best, as he said, the whole of the law. What did he say exactly?
Love is the law.
No, he said, my mind's blanking for a minute, but he says, I don't know why I blanked there, Richard. We'll have to edit this part out.
That's okay. It was love is the law, something along those lines, and everything is basically the old concept was everything is good, everything is love, even evil. But I can't remember the exact terms he used. It was love is the law.
Just give me a second. I'll think of the exact term. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So it's all about the individual will. And that's something wherein this derives from. So it's all about there's no right or wrong. They want to get to that point where they believe there's no absolute standard of right or wrong, that they're beyond that, they're above that. They've elevated themselves spiritually beyond all of that, so they can do no wrong. Only whatever it is that they will to do, that is the correct thing and the right thing. That is the type of power they want to achieve. So they don't see the abuse of other human beings as being degraded or wrong in any way. They see that as the fulfillment of their will, and that all of these things actually emanate as a type of love of sorts. And Aleister Crowley talked about that too, how evil can be love and the manifestation of evil can be love, and these kinds of twisted ideas. So we have to keep that in mind. And it's all about this law of Thelema, and that's the religion that Crowley started, that many of these other occult organizations have adopted. But of course, these ideas are far older than Crowley, and Crowley was one of the people who really lifted a lot of stuff from others and was credited with a lot of things that have been out there circulating in the occult community long before he came around. But he popularized these things, and he put them into a centralized place in teaching for people. And he was a model for many of the modern occult magicians and stuff like that who perform some of these twisted rituals and partake in this stuff and think that they're not doing anything wrong because they are misguided by occult spiritual powers that misdirect them in certain ways, and they are very much fooled by these spiritual powers. They're misdirected, misguided, and they truly think they're doing what they can and that they can become gods in this place, and they're deluded. It's not true. They cannot. And this is the great lie from the Garden of Eden. You can be as gods. It's the same thing going on here if you want to trace it back spiritually.
Another thing that he was talking about, so fits in with what you were doing there, and I looked into this a few months back, was the Moonchild novel that he wrote. That is literally just a rip-off of, well, actually, no, it's the original. Rosemary's Baby was obviously based upon that later on. And that is to do with this. You see the British royals wearing the Rosemary's Baby dress, this sangreal blood. The devil is basically a vessel for the Antichrist to be born into. Is there that an element of this? That seems to be a massive element of the Solomon's Temple kind of um adoption or bastardization of the Christian understanding of the return of Jesus, and it's all convoluted and mixed up depending on who you ask what these characters or what these beings were. You'll get 1,000 different answers from a different point of view, and you'll have to make up your own mind whether any of it is true or it's all just used to manipulate you. It's totally down to the viewer or the listener to decide for themselves. But it's clearly all been weaponized, and Crowley was weaponizing that. What is this? So say these this group, Lev Tahor, would you say that they have a Luciferian kind of outcome they want? And what is this Luciferian doctrine? What is it in the quickest way you could possibly get the listener to understand what that is? Because I know when we do these things, we kind of take things for granted that we know what they are. But that could, for someone who doesn't understand what that means, you speak to some people that practice the Druids. Although I have nothing wrong with Druids or even Wiccan or anything like that, I believe anything can be used for good or evil. They might say that Lucifer was a good god or a good, so it gets confusing when people start to look into these things, because actually most people are looking to do the right thing, and they get confused and convoluted in the swamp of all of this information. What would you say this Lucifer doctrine is in your understanding?
Well, essentially, what this is it's the rejection of all spiritual principles and any standard of right or wrong. The rejection of that, and the adoption of the idea that we can be gods ourselves. That's what it all is, and that's what all of these different things that they're doing lead to. And most certainly, there's a Luciferic principle involved with all of this, because why else would they be doing these heinous acts other than thinking that they're going to elevate themselves to some type of power or prominence or become gods themselves and to have their will manifest in certain ways in this world? So certainly that's the Luciferic principle. It's about the denialism of the existence of a creator God, and it's about the adoption of the idea that man himself will be God and can become God. So in its purest form, you might call this secular humanism combined with moral relativism. That's essentially what they're trying to manufacture in this world. But see, behind the scenes, there's these dark occultists that understand the more spiritual side of these principles and are trying to leverage and wield this to become the gods of this place themselves by engineering the masses into rejecting any form of spiritual existence. That's why they try to convince us that all there is in existence in this world and in these multiple worlds through which we exist, these spiritual realms, they want us to deny the existence of spiritual realms and accept that this physical reality in which we manifest here and we have our five senses is all that there is. So they try their very best to explain away things like consciousness as little more than a cause and effect sequence of the electric chemical manifestation of the activity of the brain and brainstem. So if they could explain this stuff away in that way and get enough people to buy into this hyper materialist paradigm, then they could achieve ultimate control here and become godlike. And that's what they want. And this all manifests ultimately in the transhumanist philosophy, which at its core is the Luciferian philosophy. All of it ties together because you see, if you get people convinced enough that this is all there is, there's nothing beyond this physical reality. And when you die, that's it. You just cease to exist. If you could convince people of that, then you got them where you want them. And then something like the transhumanist notion of things that you could upload your consciousness into a machine and live forever, well, that sounds attractive to people who accept that this is all there is, doesn't it? And that's an absolute lie. That is the great lie from the Garden of Eden, that you can be as gods, because that's what the promise of transhumanism is. You see how it all interconnects, and I know they manipulate all these different religious beliefs from all different sections of culture and throughout the course of time to lead in this direction. And many of the pro-transhumanists have said that transhumanism is the ultimate manifestation of religion. All these religions will be tied together in transhumanist, and every major religion in this world has a transhumanist society founded around that. This is the ecumenicalism that we've been warned about by people like Bill Cooper in the past. You see, how would you get all of these different religions of the world to unite and agree upon a basic principle and philosophy? Well, you would introduce transhumanism. It transcends the meanings of religion. It centralizes all of the core features into this. And it gives you the ultimate fulfillment if you twist the various scriptures, the meanings thereof, in a certain direction with this. You could convince people that this is the ultimate outcome, that these religious scriptures we're talking about, man becoming God and elevating himself, the advent of this transhumanist singularity, and the advent of what they call post-humanism, the post-human. This would be the God-man, the Ubermensch, mentioned in the Nazi ideology. You see, all of these things, they all interconnect, and they all derive from the same place back in their occult origins, and they all culminate in the transhumanist singularity. That's what it's all about. And I know that may be a bridge too far for some people to accept, but I assure you, this is the direction they're taking it. That is the ultimate fulfillment of the Luciferian philosophy, of the Luciferian doctrine that underlies all of these different manifestations that have come about through these different religious factions in this world to bring into being this beast system that is coming, and the rise of Antichrist, which exactly is this that we're talking about, this transhumanist singularity. And the first fruits of the transhumanist singularity, in my view, will be the Antichrist. It may be something entirely different than what mainline Christianity is looking for as far as an Antichrist, but that seems to be the direction we're heading. And that's my opinion, and I reserve the right to be wrong about that. I mean, you could use your own discernment and make your own decisions as to what you think about all of this. But certainly we could see the culmination of all of these things into this Luciferian philosophy. And at the heart of this Luciferian philosophy, within these various occult fraternities and secret society groups, you have this Baphometic influence, and it's always there and it's always present. And Baphomet is the new face of what you could call the satanic agenda, if you want to call it that. Now, Satanism in its purest form is as I would say, it's the polarity principle. It's the inversion principle. It's the inversion of the natural order, the total and complete inversion of the natural order. That's the true definition of Satanism. So anyway, I know that's a lot to unpack, Richard. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
What's fascinating about that is the complete contradiction in wanting to become like gods, but taking no responsibility for your behavior. What a weird brain fart, to want a better word, because you're saying you're God, but because you're God, you've got no one to answer to, therefore you're not responsible for your behavior, so you can do bad things because it's all good anyway. This is the twisting of the noggins there. It's like, but you know deep in your core that bad is bad and good is good, and they are not the same energies. They never will be. You can't square that circle. And that's what I find fascinating about that, is that these people like Donald Trump coming out and saying, we're going to take over Gaza. Well, it's not yours to have. He knows right from wrong. He does know right from wrong. He can convince himself all of his little life, his little orange life, that he doesn't know right from wrong, but he does. Every child does. A psychopath knows right from wrong. They just don't care. And that's where this Luciferian doctrine sounds like it's taken to the point of psychopathy. But it doesn't mean you don't know right from wrong. It doesn't mean you don't know left from right. You just don't care what direction you're going in because you believe they all go to the same road. But you still know they're not the same direction. And that's what I find fascinating about that. So when you come back to this Lev Tahor, then they're abusing these kids. Well, they would have been abused themselves, but they still know that it's wrong. They do know what it's wrong. And I think that's what can save people, save the world, is that compass, that moral compass in every single one of us. It doesn't matter what you read or what God you believe in or what, you know some fundamental truths. You know, you don't know where you came from and where you're going, and you know right from wrong. And you do. And everything else is just mixing it up. And I find that that's always a way of people making money or controlling others, is to confuse right from wrong. And that's what it's, or fuse right and wrong, in the fact of making them the same. They're not. And that's what I find fascinating about this. It doesn't matter what you read or what you believe in, or one character, if you think Lucifer is a good guy or Lucifer's a bad guy, or, you know, Jesus exists or he didn't. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. You know right from wrong. It's very, very simple. I can't how did we get in this mess of not even, they could still lie to us for years and years and years and thousands of years, but you would still know right from wrong. You would. So how are these Trump guys, that's a classic example, following Trump, knowing you're going to ignore everything he's done over there, everything that he's doing. Clearly it's ethnic cleansing. Clearly he's even telling you that he's taking that land that's not his, not allowed in the Palestinians' home. You know that's wrong. You know that's wrong. You know that if that happened to you, you would be upset. So you know that's wrong. Oh, if he didn't do it, Putin would do it. They're both bad nicks. You half-wits. Go and look at it. Just because another person might do it doesn't mean you do it. Oh, I better go and kick that guy in the nuts, because if not, Wayne's going to go and do it, and he's a bit bigger than me. It doesn't make sense. Just don't do bad stuff. And I can't understand it. What's happened to common sense? Like, I think this happens in the conspiracy world as well. When I've written this book by this guy, and he claims to have been in the Illuminati, and he claims to be in the Druid Council of 13. And then you read his testimony of how he came to Jesus and God, and you realize that it's just, I'm not saying that them things don't exist, but his testimony is absolutely ridiculous. He was off his head on speed, couldn't find any speed, and ended up in a cinema watching a film that taught him about the choice between good and evil. And he was apparently part of this grand Druid council, and I think you probably know who I'm talking about. And it's just total nonsense. And I think we need to come to the point where we, even with ourselves, when we do some of this stuff, is that when something confirms that we think that this thing is bigger than it is, we kind of go, yeah, that's obviously true. But sometimes people are just idiots. And sometimes it's not a perfectly laid out conspiracy. And I think that's something that's really confusing for most people because they want that one answer. Who's a goodie and who's a baddie?
Right. Well, a lot of
Really good.
things transcend that line. There's a lot of gray areas, first of
Mhm.
all. And second of all, who does the Bible inform us is the author of confusion? So remember that. If there's confusion involved, somebody's not being straight with you about something. Think about that. And there's much profit in confusion. That's another rule of
Mm.
what you might call the Illuminati here. There's much profit to be made in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. So that's one of the ways in which the system self reinforces itself. So you have all of this stuff going on. And of course, common sense is out the window because it's been engineered, socially engineered out of us at this point. Even though you do have that intrinsic knowledge of right and wrong, like inherently, because we are a spiritual being. And that's what the denialism is about. They want you to reject that spiritual being because to do so, you reject that common sense knowing or that inherent knowledge of right and wrong. And therefore, you can adopt this system of moral relativism where what's right and wrong for you might be different than what's right and wrong for me. So anything goes. With that mentality, anything goes. And this is the ultimate type of manifestation of what's called secular humanism, where you completely divide any spiritual component from yourself and accept that you are just this physical body that exists here, and that all manifestation is nothing more than the physical byproduct of some cause and effect sequence. And therefore, your consciousness itself is just little more than the physical cause and effect sequence of the electrochemical activity of your brain and brainstem. And if that's true, which I don't accept that it is, but if it's true, then they could thoroughly convince you that your consciousness, if that's true of it, can be replicated via an algorithm. And it's little more than an algorithm. And therefore, it can be duplicated in a machine and you can live forever in any type of a vehicle that you want, any type of a body you can upload your consciousness to, or any type of a virtual reality or simulation or anything like that. And that's another facet of this. They are thoroughly trying to convince people that we exist in a simulation environment. And
And that's
I
another
don't
point,
accept
Wayne.
that.
Is no, and I don't either. I can understand it being a game in a sense of an experience, a constructed experience. Clearly, it's been constructed as designed to this place, but the fakeness of it, I don't abide by either. But another thing is that when they're talking about you can live forever, but at the very same time they're telling you that you're not human, like there's nothing there, that you are just a chemical accident. So what are you living forever with as a chemical accident? It doesn't make sense. Do you know what I mean?
No, it doesn't make sense if you really analyze it from that perspective. What are you? What is the ontological self? Am I just this physical vessel? Is that all that I am? Well, if that's what they thoroughly convince people that they are, then certainly I guess it would make sense that you could duplicate that via a machine and live forever in some sense. And that's the hubris of these transhumanist philosophy people. They think they can do that kind of thing. They have that hubris to them where they think they could build a better man than the creator did. They could build a better world than the creator did. And I think that's a flawed type of a perspective. But at any rate, of course, we see that's what they're pushing for. And this goes back to something that many of these dark occultists know, and this is called the world of shells. That's what
Mm.
they are attempting to build here with this transhumanist philosophy. It's an empty shell devoid of any spirit. It's a dead entity. And that's the system we live in. It's the reign of dead matter, as Michael Hoffman calls it. That's what they've been trying to engineer. And the ultimate fulfillment of that absolute reign of dead matter is this transhumanist notion where they will convince people that you are nothing more than this physical being and that your physical consciousness can be replicated via machine. And they will convince a lot of people that this is true by having some of the first fruits of that manifest. And okay, that seems like my dead grandmother that's talking to me through the computer. And it totally acts like her. It's her personality. It's her to a T. Now, if they could convince you that they successfully uploaded their consciousness in that way, then you will line up to have that done too, so that you could live forever in whatever type of a simulated reality you want. And in the reality of all of it, this is the great culling. That's what it's designed for. It's a eugenics program. Eugenics without coercion. That's exactly what pro-transhumanists have described transhumanism as. It's eugenics without coercion. So you'll line up and you will be culled. Now, your spirit, the ontological self, will go on to whatever is beyond here, but there will be a cheap knockoff, a duplicate of you that exists in some digital mainframe somewhere. This is all about the digitalization of human consciousness, or the attempt to do that. And I don't think it crosses over. I think it's all a lie. It's the great lie from the Garden of Eden. And that's ultimately what their objective is. They want people to be bought into this world of shells. They want the dead entity. They want the vessel. And this is the important concept that I try my best to communicate to people. The human being is the gateway between worlds. So if the human being is the gateway between worlds, if we are absent from the body, our spirit is absent from the body, that leaves a void there. Now, there are other spiritual beings and entities that very much want to manifest in physicality here. And they see this as an opportunity to step in. It's an occult concept called the walk-in, or you could call it demonic possession or whatever you want, where they will attempt to come in to these physical bodies to have this physical experience here. So there's going to be an animus, a spirit that drives and guides and directs things, because it's a natural principle that cannot be bypassed. There has to be an animus, a spirit in this vessel. Now, if it's not a human spirit, what kind of a spirit is it? And that's the whole premise of transhumanism, the occult side, that doesn't get talked about. There's going to be something else here, and it's going to pretend to be you, and you're going to maybe identify with it here physically. And like I said, I know this is probably a bridge too far for a lot of people, and maybe they're not fully picking up on what I'm saying, because this requires years of background understanding of occult principles that are taught by these secret societies and stuff to get to what we're talking about here. But that's the importance of us doing this show, Richard. We need to bring these things to people's attention so that they can get maybe some of that background foundation to understanding what it is that these controllers of this world believe in or acting on. So what they want to do is they want to build this world of shells because they think they could live forever physically here and defer judgment of themselves from the true creator of this realm and bypass all of that. If they could become the gods of this place and live physically forever in this physical world of shells, then they could skirt their karma. That is what they believe, and that is what they are trying to build here.
And that's why we'll end it here. And I think it's a really good point. A really good point to end on is that's why you see, in my opinion, Donald Trump putting things out of him being the scapegoat. He's going to take all of this cult. I said Israel before, but obviously beyond that is this cult, this luciferian, Sabbatean, whatever name you want to call it, anti-human cult that want to place all of their sins on you. And that's what Donald Trump is about. He's the scapegoat leading you off a cliff. And that's the point. They need to do something with that karmic energy because they believe in the energy. They just want to offload it on the West, on Edom. And that's why the US and the Europe are in the firing lines for what Israel, and it's not really Israel, it's this death cult that have used Israel as a front, and that's going to be taken away as well. And everyone who's there is going to be sacrificed as well. It's not in this cult. It's a scapegoat mission. That's where we're at the moment. And Donald Trump is the symbol of the scapegoat at the moment. And anyone who's following him and refusing to look at the bare facts of he's absolutely propping up artificial intelligence left, right, and center. And he's giving you this false idea that you've got to catch up with the Chinese because the Chinese are so far ahead they could make something for 6 million when it costs 6 billion. It's 6 again. For them to do it when actually they knew about it all along. We've known about it since December, but way before then, and they've been sharing papers and working together on this technology for decades because it's the intelligence. It's the same thing with the atom bomb. They were sharing intelligence across intelligence organizations, and at the very top levels, the Rothschild, Fifth Man, Cambridge 5 type level, they knew that there was all moles in here and there. They knew. They watch it from the top. They're the watchers, and this is where a group like Lev Tahor fit in. It's almost like that's a result of this mentality, than it's actually part of the overall agenda. It's a kind of natural result that people will take advantage of that kind of mentality who are twisted or been abused of themselves. Do you know what I mean? It's part of the system. They know that that is going to be a nodule within their demonic system. It's going to bring up these subcategories of abusers because that's the system they're building.
Exactly. It's the same way that they inculcate terrorism or terrorist cells. And we see that going on in live time. And anybody who's ever been involved with any type of intelligence will tell you that. They know what's going to happen. They know if they bomb the crap out of a certain region, well, that's going to make tensions, and that people raised in that area are going to harbor a grudge against those people that bombed the crap out of that region. And it's going to incite terrorist organizations and terrorist cells popping up, trying to seek revenge or recompense for what's been done to them. They know this. This is why you have the Mujahideen that have now become, I guess, Al-Qaeda, which doesn't really exist, by the way. Al-Qaeda simply means the base, and it's just a name the intelligence community gave to these unorganized, these previously disorganized, unorganized terror cells that it cropped up. And then they took control of these terror cells from the inside and turned them into an organized type of a thing. And they've branched off into many different types of organizations like Hamas and ISIS and all of these other things. And you'll notice they always use the occult names with this stuff too. ISIS. I mean, what is ISIS at the core? If you go back, you look at Egyptian mythology, and you know everything you want to know about what this organization is founded upon. It's not anything to do with Islam in and of itself. It's a form of extreme Islamism, or however you want to categorize that's been weaponized and used for magical occult purposes in this sense, to strike fear in the hearts of people. And they've weaponized it, and they've used the mythological archetype of Isis, the Egyptian goddess of magic, to get it done. And people don't recognize that because we're not taught to think in that way. We're taught that science is the end all be all of everything, and that anything spiritual is nonsense, and any type of a situation that we use like this to connect the dots in the synchromystic type way is nothing but mystical nonsense. And that's the way they've engineered society to think. And I'm telling you, couldn't be further from the truth. You need your intuition. You need to have that discernment and that sense of things to see these seemingly disconnected bits of information out there in the greater information field and connect the dots with that, because that is what the dark occultists at the top of the power structure weaponize against us all the time. Your unconscious mind inherently recognizes the archetype. Your subconscious mind will eventually manifest some type of a conscious behavior change based upon that archetype implanted in your mind. And if you're unaware consciously of that archetype, it will affect you in ways that you could not possibly conceive of. But once you are aware and you notice these archetypes ever present, this synchromystic metadata, as I like to call it, then it doesn't affect your thought processes in the negative ways that are intended by those people that put that information out there, or those spiritual entities that put that information out there in the greater information field. And I call this information field the zeitgeist, the spirit of the time, because it is a spiritual component. So it is a beyond human intelligence oftentimes that encodes this metadata into the zeitgeist. So it's important that we recognize that, because when we recognize that on a conscious level, that prevents us from being programmed into the response mechanism that they want us to react with. So I know that's a lot, and we should probably go ahead and close it out because I'm sure we're probably close to time here, Richard.
We are, but that's been a fantastic episode, guys. Please like and share the show. This is all about showing you have this intuition and this information out there and a way to tap into it that no one can get around. You just need to follow that little bit within you, that little spark within you that knows what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. So you can find all my work at iconic.com, and you can find my Substack at Some May Conspire. And Wayne, where can they connect with you and find all your work that you're doing?
I say the best place to go is my website, www.alchemicaltechrevolution.com. Everything I do is centralized there, and people could find me and contact me if they want to. There's a contact section down there. So if you have any important information you need to share with me or think that might be beneficial in some way, go ahead and send it. I have an email address there, and I look forward to hearing from people.
And if you have any subject matters you would like us to cover in the way that we do things in the what's the thing? Metadata.
Metadata.
And we're looking in the metadata of it, how it all connects in, then please do let us know. And we will be back with you in 2 weeks' time. Take care. Goodbye.